Bienvenidos! Welcome, everyone. Happy Monday. How are you today? Welcome back to Mexico Relocation Guide. If you're new around here, my name is Mariana and you're watching Mexico Relocation Guide. And today's live stream is going to cover a lot of really good information about driving to and driving in Mexico. So if you're interested in that topic, today's live stream is just for you. I'm going to let you guys me here. Hello, thank you so much for being here, Terry, Nemo, Dale. So glad you guys are joining us early. I'm going to let a couple of you join in. And if you notice, I've changed the format of these Q&As just a little bit, just so that I can deliver the best information for you guys faster without less having to think on the spot, and then I also have a chance to be able to research some of your questions if I don't already know the answer to them. So thank you so much for everybody who posted or submitted your questions ahead of time. Keep in mind that I will only be answering questions that were submitted ahead of time. And unfortunately, I won't get to all of them because there was over 200 people who submitted questions about driving in Mexico or driving to Mexico. So today I'm just going to cover the most frequently asked ones out of 200 submissions since last week. But thank you all so much for being here. And again, we are going to be doing these more often with specific topics that we'll cover, like, for example, residency or pets. Today's topic is driving to and in Mexico. And that way you guys can easily just absorb that information for that specific topic. And it also allows me to put chapters so you can skip ahead or go back to something if you're more interested in that specific question or that specific topic. So thank you all so much for being here. Let's get started. If you see me looking on this side of the screen, it's because I'm looking at some of my notes. So just FYI, I'm going to be posting the question up on the screen, and then I'll be looking at some of my notes here. So the first question comes in from a lot of people, and that is, can I use my foreign driver's license in Mexico? And the short answer is yes. You can definitely use your foreign driver's license in Mexico as long as it is valid. So as long as it hasn't been expired. And it's in English, or that it's in Western characters. So meaning, if you have something that has non-Western characters and it would need to get translated. But most of you probably are watching us from a country where, Western characters are used or the Western alphabet is used. So therefore, you'd be able to use your foreign driver's license in Mexico. However, I still recommend that you get a local driver's license regardless. For starters, you can use it to get a lot of local discounts if a discount is applied to somebody who is a local resident of that state. For example, in museums, amusement parks, other different places like that offer discounts to people who live in that state. You would only be able to get that discount if you were able to show a driver's license for that state. For example, if you're living in Quintana Roo, I know, for example, Xel-Há and a lot of those amusement parks have special discounts for its residents, local residents, and the only way for you to know, or the only way for them to know that you're a local resident is through your state driver's license. Another reason I recommend that you have a local ID is that it can help you in situations with the tránsito, with the street police and highway police. So, for example, if you get stopped by a cop, you will most likely have a better experience if you have a Mexican driver's license. There's no doubt about that. Just, it'll be a better interaction all around. I've heard this from other people, and I have no doubt in my mind that they're going to give you some time if you have a Mexican driver's license. Driver's license, again, must be valid and not expired. And once it does expire, you have to either renew it, meaning you have to go to your home country or your home state if you're from the United States, or you can obtain your Mexican driver's license then. I know there's a few states that have done away with having to be there in person if you're from the US for you to renew your driver's license. So if you're from one of those states, and it's less likely that you'll have to worry about that, you can renew it over mail. But if you happen to be from a country where you have to be there in person, then I would recommend getting a Mexican driver's license at that time. The next question is, hey, how can I plan my drive to Mexico? How can I best plan my drive to Mexico? And I recommend doing a few things. First, I highly recommend downloading Google Maps if you haven't downloaded that app. And if you don't already use it, I think it's the best one. Some people do prefer Waze, but I personally really like Google Maps. Google Maps will give you 1 to 2 routes and show you either a toll road route or a libre, or the free route. So just FYI, you have to know how to discern between those two. I always recommend taking the toll road, always. Toll roads can be easily identified because they always end with D at the end of their toll number. So, for example, if you were going to be taking Ruta 115D, then that is a toll road. If you're taking Ruta or Route 115 without the D, then that's the free road. Keep in mind that if you're driving to Mexico or across a long stretch of highway on the weekend, chances are you could add 1 to 2 hours to your total trip, especially if you're going through any major cities on your way to your final destination. So just something for you to keep in mind. Next question is how do I find the best, or what's the best way to find dog-friendly hotels? There are a couple of websites that are used around the expat community that can help your search. One of them is bringfido.com. Don't worry, at the end of this live stream, I'm going to include the links to anything that I mentioned in the comments of this video. But bringfido.com is one that's really popular, although they have a smaller inventory of places or options around Mexico. So for that reason, if you want to expand your search, then I recommend Airbnb or booking.com. Either one of those is a really good option. And they have filters where you can see, if you're bringing a pet, you add a pet to your guest list on Airbnb. On Booking, they have an actual filter that says, pet friendly. So you click on that and it shows you your pet friendly options. I also recommend that if you're using booking.com and you're using the pet friendly filter, that you actually still reach out to the hotel. Like, it'll give you a list of hotels that are pet friendly. But once you actually get that list and you find one that you really like, I still recommend reaching out to that hotel directly, because we've had several customers who, hotels sometimes maybe were pet friendly at one point, and then they might switch that and no longer are pet friendly at a future time, and they don't update their booking.com listing. So we've had customers who booked, didn't double check with the hotel, and then when they got there, they were turned away. So they had to find an alternative option, that same day, which can be very, very stressful and frustrating. So just be aware that I think that if you're using booking.com, Airbnb, it's not a problem. I think the listings are pretty up to date. But booking.com is more of an issue where, a hotel might say it's pet friendly and then come down to it. Or they might have a limit of weight or a breed restriction or something like that. So just something for you to be aware of. Next question is, I'm nervous about driving to Mexico. Could I hire a driver in Mexico to drive me? And absolutely, yes. In fact, dozens of Mexico Relocation Guide customers have done this before. And to help you figure out who you can trust, we include a few recommended private drivers in our complete Mexico Relocation Guide that can either fly and meet you in Canada or the United States and then drive your vehicle down with you. Or if you have pets, household goods that you need driven down with their cars, then they can drive up to the United States and then drive your pet and your belongings down to Mexico. Door-to-door delivery. So it's really a really good way, especially if you're nervous about driving in Mexico, to have somebody that knows the rules of the road and just knows the culture of driving in Mexico, and you can just sit back and relax. You could also hire these private drivers, again, to bring down your pet. So maybe it's not you that's going to be driving down with them. Maybe they're just picking up your pets for you and you're flying down. That's also an option. So there's a lot of different ways that you can go about that. The only thing you need to be aware of when you're hiring a private person or an individual to bring down either your pets or your household goods is that unlike an international moving company or an international pet transporter, these individuals most likely don't have household good insurance, right? Like an international moving company would. So if your household goods get damaged along the way, then, it's a risk that you have to probably assess before hiring one of these people. Uh, Now, obviously, the benefit is that you're going to pay significantly less than if you would hire an international moving company, especially if you don't have a lot of things that you're bringing down. If you're just bringing down a couple of suitcases, some boxes, something that can fit on maybe a van or a small trailer, then that's a benefit of hiring one of these private drivers as opposed to an international moving company. I highly recommend an international moving company if you have a one bedroom apartment or a 2 bedroom apartment or a house that you're moving and you're moving all your belongings down. Then I would recommend an international moving company. If you want access, by the way, to any of our contacts in our directory, we do include it in our complete Mexico relocation guide. Some of them even give you exclusive discounts for being a Mexico Relocation Guide customer. And the guide also has important tips on driving, the documents you need to drive legally in Mexico, along with steps on how to obtain these documents. More information on that will be included in the link of the comments, on the comments down below. I'll include a link there. So what tips do you have to ensure my safe driving in Mexico? There's so many, right? And I actually wrote a blog post recently on like the 13 pro tips for driving in Mexico. But that's only like, surface level. There's obviously, it could be a very long list of, hey, do this, not that. But these are some of the most important ones. So I highly recommend that you check out that blog post. And I'll include, again, a link in the comments after this video. A couple of them include driving during the day. I think if you ask anybody who's driven a long time in Mexico, especially on highways, right? Let's assume that most of these tips are for highway driving. And I'll mention one that isn't. But most highways have really poor illumination, like poor lighting, even on toll roads. Some of them have great lighting. I know this isn't all across the board, but a lot of them don't. So the reason why you want to drive during the day is because if you have really bad lighting on this highway, on this long stretch of road, then it would be hard for you to see livestock or possible other obstructions, or maybe there was a wreck and somebody's bumper is in the middle of the road, they haven't cleaned it up. I recommend driving during the day, not because you're any safer during the day or at night. I know some people think like, oh, it's because criminals come out at night, and that's not the reason why people recommend driving during the day. It's usually because of livestock. I also recommend taking the toll roads. I usually advise against taking the free roads unless you just really want to go off the beaten path and you're interested in seeing all the little pueblos that you can across Mexico as you make your final destination, right? If you want to make it a longer road trip and you're really curious to see more of Mexico, then yeah, definitely take the free roads. But I do recommend the toll roads if you're looking for efficiency. Also, on toll roads, if you didn't know this, you have a sort of insurance that covers you in case of an accident, in case you break down, and it has free towing. So since you're paying for this toll already, it does include this type of insurance. Another thing I recommend is saving the Green Angels or the Ángeles Verdes number on your phone. Dial 078 to get in touch with them. They help you fill up, they help you change spare tires, they help you with a variety of different things in case you get, it's kind of like roadside assistance. The only thing is that you do have to have a Mexican line in order for you to be able to dial the 078. So as soon as you drive across the border, I would also recommend going to an OXXO to buy a Telcel SIM that you can top up with $5-10, and then you have a Mexican line. That's another option. I also recommend that for these toll roads, you carry at least 1,000 pesos, just for change so you can use on the toll road. Some people say 2,000, 3,000. It just depends on how far you're going. It also depends on whether or not you have the pase, which is essentially a machine that toll booths can read and then discount the amount that you've topped up on this machine on this tag, right? But if you have that, then I would say carry at least 1,000 pesos. If you don't have it, then I would say then carry 3,000 pesos for tolls. And again, it's not that you're gonna use it all up, but you might want to stop at a gas station. Their card reader might not be working, so then you need to pay cash for your gasoline. So it's a good idea for you to carry a good amount of change when, especially if you're driving a really long distance. And then for the other tips, I really recommend reading that blog post that I posted last week or 2 weeks ago. It's on our blog. I'll include the link in the comments after today's live stream. So, what do I need to carry with me while driving in Mexico? Well, for starters, you need to have a valid driver's license. Very important. Doesn't matter if it's Mexican or foreign, can't be expired, needs to be active. You also need to have a temporary import permit if you're driving a foreign plated car. The immigration document that allows you to visit or live in Mexico, such as your Forma Migratoria Múltiple or FMM, or your residency card if you're not a citizen. If you're a citizen of Mexico, then obviously your passport or your INE and your driver's license would be fine. You also need to have Mexican liability auto insurance. Very important. It's mandatory. If your foreign insurance, if your foreign insurance says that they cover you in Mexico, that's not the case. Like, they might actually have some international coverage, but the authorities in Mexico will not consider this valid insurance in Mexico. So you have to have Mexican liability insurance. Very important. What are some unwritten road rules in Mexico? I like this one. There's actually a lot of them, and some of I think the most important ones that could prevent you from getting into an accident are, for starters, when you're driving on a 2-lane highway, there will usually be a shoulder. And you may think that this shoulder is for people who have car problems or who need to stop or might have run out of gas or something like that. But the shoulder on a highway in Mexico isn't only used for cars in trouble. The shoulder acts kind of like a third lane. So when you're driving on the highway, if you notice that people are kind of driving on the shoulder, it's because they're the slower cars, so they're allowing other cars to pass them, especially on a 1-lane or 2-lane highway. It's more common for people to drive on the shoulder. Somebody asked me, hey, I was on a bus from, I think it was Cuernavaca to Mexico City, and they said that the driver basically drove on the shoulder, or at least one of the wheels was over the shoulder the entire time. And they asked me if that was normal. And the reality is that, yeah, you'll mostly see buses and trailers driving more on the shoulder because they're probably the slower driving cars or vehicles on the road, and they want to allow people to pass them. Which brings me to another point. When you're driving on the highway, if you turn on your left blinker, it signals to the car behind you that it's safe for them to pass you. So don't turn on your left blinker unless you want the car behind you to pass you. If you're following the rules, right? If we're being like good boys and girls and we're following the rules of the United States or Canada and we're turning our left blinker on because we want to actually switch lanes, just be warned that you're actually telling the person behind you that it's safe for them to pass. So don't do that unless you're letting the person behind you pass. Otherwise, you run the risk of somebody hitting you. And it's also extremely important for you to be aware of your surroundings when driving. Like, texting and driving can almost always be a guarantee for you to be in a wreck, especially if you're new at driving in Mexico. The rules don't always apply. For example, stop signs are suggestions. They're more like yield signs, really. So if there's no traffic coming and you're at a stop, the car behind you is going to assume you're going to roll right into it. And if you make a complete stop and the person behind you isn't paying really good attention, or they're tailgating you, or they're following a little bit too close, they'll probably hit you. So just FYI, stop signs are more like yield signs. And you have to really be aware of your surroundings. If there's nobody behind you and you just want to be extra safe, then it's probably okay. But as soon as somebody gets behind you and you're not going, there's no traffic coming, they'll probably honk at you. Um, I would recommend, honestly, for the first 2-3 months of you living in Mexico, that you just ride around in taxis and Ubers and see how they drive and see what things are they doing, what kind of unwritten rules are they following. For example, like the stop sign, using it as a yield sign, especially if you're a nervous driver. I think that would be a really good idea so that you're not behind the wheel, especially if you live in a mid to large size city in Mexico where traffic can be very crazy during rush hours. It's less common if you're in rural areas or if you're in a small town for you to have to know these unwritten rules, right? Like most people will just, if they see you stop, they're probably not going to honk at you. But if you live in a mid-sized to larger city, I would really recommend that you drive with an Uber or taxi for the first 2 to 3 months, just so one, you get to sit back, relax, get to know the town, and then two, you don't have to try to remember all these rules at once. Um, Let's see. The next one is, do I get insurance before crossing the border? Yes, absolutely. Get auto insurance before driving across the border. All insurance companies can give you a quote based on the first day that you need to be insured, and that can be a future date. So, yes, absolutely. You need to have insurance the minute that you start driving in Mexico. Is diesel gas readily available? For the most part, yes. Pemex almost always has diesel gas along with other gas stations like Shell or BP, amongst other gas stations. Another tip for putting gas in your car is that the colors on the gas, the company's sign, indicate the level of gas you're buying. For example, La Verde, or the green one, is Magna, which is the equivalent of unleaded regular gas if you're from the United States or Canada. It has an octane level of 87. And then the higher octane is called La Roja, or the red one, which is premium. And that has an octane level of 93, which is the equivalent of premium level if you're from the United States or Canada. Then there's diesel, which is usually black. And while diesel is usually available all around Mexico, when you're driving on long stretches of highway, I would recommend filling up as soon as you see, at the very least, if you're at 50% of if your gas tank is at 50% empty. And it's always a really good idea for you to fill up at a gas station whenever you see that there's diesel available. We're moving through these pretty quick. I'm glad. So I've heard to watch out for some gas station scams. What are they, and how can I avoid them? And I missed the scam word in there, but there are a couple of gas station scams that you can avoid. Avoiding them really is all about paying attention to what's happening. What's happening at the gas pump, what's happening with the attendant, what's happening with your card, what's happening with your money. There's also a law prohibiting self-service gas stations in Mexico, which is why you will see attendants pumping your gas. So there's another time that you have to watch what's going on at the gas station. For example, when you arrive, you'll tell them how much you want of the gas type. If you want it filled, you will say, llénela, por favor, which means to top it off. But be sure the gas attendant sets the pump gas at 0. That's the number one thing you have to watch out for, is that when you show up, it's not, showing somebody, the person before you, the customer before you's gas total amount. And then when they pump, they want to charge you something on top of that. So don't do that. Make sure that it's set at 0. You don't want to pay more than what you're putting in. Pay attention to the money that you're giving the gas attendant. If you give them a 500 peso bill, make sure that they're giving you correct change. If you pumped 250 pesos worth of gas, or 300, it's more likely you'll pump more than that. But make sure that you are paying attention to the amount that you're handing over and that you get the correct change. If I were you, and you probably won't know the denominations. If you're just moving to Mexico, you probably won't know how to say these denominations in Spanish. So for that, I would recommend just, being very intentional when you hand over the money, and just making sure that you're both, you're not distracted. In other words, you're giving them the money, and you're showing that you know how much you gave. You can pay with a card at most gas stations. You should just make sure that you keep an eye on your card, because there have been times when fraudulent transactions are placed on your card without your consent. Or sometimes this isn't always the case, of course, and I don't want to, scare you all off, but there have been cases where the card can get swiped and then copied, and then your card information is now stolen. So just make sure you keep an eye on your card, and make sure that when they do charge your card, you ask for your ticket, which is basically your receipt. And main thing is just don't be distracted. If you give somebody, you show up, you tell them you want 400 pesos of La Verde, or 600 pesos of La Roja. Make sure you see the pump, and you see that they're actually pumping 400 or 600 pesos of whatever you asked for. Because it's also common for them to say that they pumped this amount, and then next thing you know, you drive off and you're still sitting at half a tank, which means you just got scammed if that amount would have filled up your tank. I also recommend that you get to know your car before driving in Mexico, and know how much your car holds in liters. That way, when you're sitting at half the amount, you know exactly what to ask for, how many, or you can see how many liters it should be. So get to know your car, and get to know those conversions: liters to gallons, gallons to liters. Does having a US or Canada plated car make you a target for police corruption? No, not necessarily. There are thousands of foreign plated cars driving to Mexico every week. And the majority of them aren't victims of any police corruption. So I don't want you to think that just because you have plates from Canada or the United States, that you're automatically going to get pulled over. But what I would say is probably the most important thing is for you to never give a police or cop a reason for you to be pulled over. So don't speed, have your license plate visible. And if you are stopped, you want to avoid escalating the situation. So even if you do get asked for a bribe from a cop, be cordial. Don't assume anything. Just because you are being stopped doesn't mean that they're asking for a bribe. So don't automatically go into defense. And definitely don't escalate the situation. Insist that you pay your fine, or that you go to the police station and pay for this in person, even if they ask for a donation to make it go away sooner. I would also recommend having a pretty large dash cam. I think it's a good idea regardless of where in the world you're driving. It gives you some form of verifiable information, right? In case you're in a wreck, or in this case, in case you're stopped and then somebody's trying to shake you down. I would also have something printed on the outside saying, "Hola, sonríe, está siendo grabado," and I can put this in the comments too, which means hello, smile because you're being recorded, right? And this helps deter the highway police from a shakedown if they were even going to ask you for any money. I also recommend not ever paying any bribes if you're asked for one. I mean, I highly, highly encourage you to, again, insist on paying any fine at the police station, or being given a ticket for whatever wrongdoing it is that they pulled you over for. Most than likely, or chances are, most police, if that happens, they'll just, wave you off and tell you don't worry about it. They don't want to deal with the paperwork. So, but first and foremost, don't pay the bribe. I think the only way to get rid of some of that corruption is if people stand together and refuse to pay those bribes. Now, is it true that if you cross the border at Baja California Sur, sorry, that is wrongly placed, California Baja Sur, you may not need a temporary import permit? So if you're driving, yes, if you're driving in the area of Mexico known as a free zone, or La Zona Libre, which is 25 kilometers from the border or about 14 miles from a border with Mexico. The free zone includes both Baja California and Baja California Sur, a large part of Sonora, Quintana Roo, so because that borders Belize, parts of Chiapas, and the 25-kilometer distance between the states of Nuevo León, Chihuahua, Coahuila, and Tamaulipas. So, for example, we've probably all heard of the city of Matamoros. That would be considered the free zone. Or Nuevo Laredo, that is considered the free zone. So if you were living there, you wouldn't need a temporary import permit. If you plan to drive outside of this area, though, you should absolutely apply for a temporary import permit when you're driving across the border, because you can only get them at the borders, and you can only get them as far inland in Baja California Sur as La Paz. So if you're driving in Tamaulipas, for example, and you passed Reynosa or you passed Matamoros, you will no longer be able to get that temporary import permit unless you drive back to the border, which you don't want to have to do. You pay a deposit for that temporary import permit, which is anywhere between $200 to $400 US, depending on the age of the vehicle. And if you want your deposit back, you have to turn in or cancel your temporary import permit before its expiration date. If you do it after the expiration date, you won't get your deposit back. You can only get your deposit back or cancel your temporary import permit at a Banjército office, which is customs, aduana. And Banjército is actually a bank for customs and aduana. It's not aduana. But Banjército is the one that processes the payment for the temporary import permit. And you can only get this money back by canceling your temporary import permit at one of the Banjército offices at land borders, which is, I know, some confusion because people think, well, I can extend my temporary import permit as a resident at an airport in, Mexico City. Why can't I cancel my temporary import permit there? Well, because you're basically giving back the permission to temporarily drive your vehicle in Mexico for a determined period of time. So the only way for them to be able to know that you're actually going to leave with your car is at a land border. In the comments, I'm going to include a link to all the Banjército offices at land borders so you know where you can go to cancel your temporary import permit. I also recommend that you pay this deposit in cash, and there's a reason for that. Let's say that you're driving as a tourist. So more than likely, you'll be given 180 days on your FMM, and therefore 180 days as your temporary import permit. Well, in 180 days, a lot of things can happen. If you pay with a specific debit or credit card and you lose it, Banjército can only give back that money or give back that deposit to the original payment type. So if you lost your card, if for whatever reason you don't have it anymore, you can't get your deposit back anymore. So that's why cash is a really good idea. If you don't cancel your temporary import permit, you won't be able to bring in another foreign plated car. So if you leave Mexico and you forgot to stop at the land border at Banjército to cancel your temporary import permit, you won't be able to bring another foreign plated car under your same name. If you have a family member, they can bring in another car, but you yourself will not be able to. Now, once you have your temporary residency card, so once you're a temporary resident, you can extend your temporary import permit at one of the Banjército offices, which they have them all over Mexico, including some international airports and other places throughout Mexico. You don't have to go back to the land borders to extend them. Now, does everyone need an FMM when driving across the border? If you are a tourist, if you are a foreign tourist, yes, every foreign tourist, regardless of how long you're going to be visiting Mexico, regardless of how far a distance you're going to be traveling in Mexico, you will need a FMM, Forma Migratoria Múltiple, which is essentially your tourist permit. If you are a resident of Mexico coming in for canje, which is The second part of your residency process, you must get your FMM at a land border. So without this, without your FMM, if you're coming in for canje, you will not be able to get your residency card. And the only way for you to get your residency card would be for you to go back to a land border and get your FMM, come back to somewhere in Mexico, assuming that you're not doing your canje at a one of the land borders, right? So assuming that maybe you're going all the way to Mexico City, you would have to go all the way back to get your FMM. So it's your responsibility to stop by an immigration office. You'll see the letters INM at specific land borders. You have to stop by and you have to get an FMM and insist that they mark it for 30 days and under canje. If this is your very first time coming to Mexico as a resident to exchange your stamp in your passport for a residency card. Very important. Don't forget it. If you're flying, it's less important for you to remember because you have to go through immigration once you disembark a flight. Once you have your residency card, you do not need to have an FMM in Mexico, whether you're flying in or whether you're driving in. And citizens, of course, don't need an FMM because they can use their Mexican passport. And then the last question that I have are, what are some apps that we recommend for driving in Mexico? Well, I mentioned one earlier, which is Google Maps. A lot of people also use Waze. And there's another map that I think is amazing. I got to give like a huge accolade to the person that created this. I'm going to share my screen with you guys. It's been updated pretty recently. One second. It has a lot of things. It has all the pueblos mágicos around Mexico, colonial cities, coastal cities, all the land borders, all the land border cities, UNESCO World Heritage Sites, which I think is so neat, archaeological sites, natural areas where you can go swim. There's so much hot springs. And he also includes a couple of gas stations across Mexico. So I'm going to include the link to this map in the comments of this video. I gotta say, if you created, oh, I'm sorry, I'm not sharing the right. I'm so sorry, you guys. Let me share the right screen. Forgive me. Promised I wouldn't do this, and look at where we are. All right. Okay, sorry. Let's start again. So, this is a map I'm talking about, and you can click on specific things if you want to see like Cueva del Espíritu Santo. If you want to see natural areas, you can zoom out, and maybe you want to plan a trip based on, water areas in specific states. It also shows you like gas stations around Mexico. So if you're planning your route, I think this is really great. I believe I'm 99% certain it's been recently updated because he posted it on the group Driving in Mexico or On the Road in Mexico. And it's a great map. So I'll include it in the links in the comments, link to this in the comments after this live stream. I want to say, if you created this map, kudos to you. Very cool map. So those are all our questions for today. Again, I hope that this format helps you guys to quickly absorb this information, get all the topics that you want. Please, I encourage you to continue submitting your questions ahead of time before the next live stream. For you to know when the next live stream is, we post that in our newsletter. If you haven't signed up for our newsletter, go to mexicorelocationguide.com/newsletter. And I will share what the next topic is. I'm putting it in the comments. mexicorelocationguide.com/newsletter. go sign up, and I will send you an email on what the next Q&A topic is, how to submit your question, and then when we will go live. So thank you all so much. I hope this has been helpful, and I will see you guys very soon on the next Q&A. Nos vemos. Hasta luego.